ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਟੀਵੀ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਰਸ਼ਦੀਪ ਤੇ ਮਿਊਨਿਸਪਲ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਕਤੂਬਰ 20 ਨੂੰ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਐਡਵਾਂਸ ਪੋਲ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ। ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ 6 ਤਰੀਕ ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਅਗਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹ 10, 11 ਤੇ 13 ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਐਡਵਾਂਸ ਪੋਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਕਾਉਂਸਲਰ ਚੁਣਨਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਮੇਅਰ ਚੁਣਨਾ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਆਪਾਂ ਟਰਸਟੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਚੁਣਨਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਪਦੀ ਵੋਟ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਵਧੀਆ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਰ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਖੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਬਰਨਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਲੀ ਰੈਂਕਿਨ, ਉਹ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੈਲਕਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਵੈਲਕਮ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਲੀ, ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਦ ਸ਼ੋ।
Thank you. Sat Sri Akal. Namaste.
Sat Sri Akal. And you are running for the council for the Burnaby, right?
Yes, I am. I served 22 years on council in the past. I'm an immigration lawyer, and I'm running for city council in Burnaby. So I was elected 8 terms, so I'm well known in Burnaby, and through the Apna community knows me fairly well.
Apna,
yeah.
yes. ਸੋ ਇਹ ਦੇਖੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਖਾਸੀਅਤ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਥੋੜੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ। ਸੋ ਕੋਈ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਮਲਟੀਕਲਚਰਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹ 22 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਸਰਵ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਸੋ 8 ਵਾਰੀ ਇਹ ਕਾਉਂਸਲਰ ਚੁਣੇ ਜਾ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਟਸ ਯੂਰ 9th term, right?
This would be my 9th
would
term.
be if you will be elected.
Right.
So in your 8 terms, what do you think, how many issues Burnaby is facing right now?
The important issues facing the Sikh and the Indian community are the housing issues. We have a situation, as you know, throughout the Lower Mainland where the cost of single-family housing is unaffordable for many young families. Did you know that in North Burnaby, the average house price for a single-family home is $1.5 million?
Yes.
And in South Burnaby, where I live, it's $1.6 million. So as a result, many young families are priced out of the market. Now, all my Apna friends tell me that there's an issue in Burnaby is that they do not allow a lot of secondary suites. The limit on legal suites is 1 suite per home, and there are limited opportunities for duplex housing and for additional suites. So as an issue on council, I believe we need to increase the supply of secondary suites. We have to look at more legal triplexes. We have some limited areas where we can build legal fourplexes in Burnaby and legal duplexes, but we have to work harder to find more opportunities for ground-oriented housing that's going to be significantly less in cost than single-family houses. Burnaby also has a policy which I don't agree with, that if you have a second stove in your home, and that's whether you have a secondary suite, whether it's occupied or not, or as many Indian homes, as you know, they have a second fry kitchens for cooking chapatis, rotis, puris. And this charge, an extra $700 per extra stove, will apply to all second stoves in Burnaby. So obviously that has a significant effect of people that have suites to provide extra housing and help with the mortgages. And even if you have a fry kitchen and extra stove in it, that's certainly unfair. Burnaby has to look at laneway or coach housing. We have many areas of the city where the lots are quite vast, much larger than Vancouver, for example. Vancouver has allowed laneway or coach houses on lots. Burnaby does not allow it at all, and that's something that Burnaby and frankly other municipalities like Surrey and Richmond should look at as well. So these are the types of issues that my Indian friends in Burnaby and tell me that we really need to address in Burnaby.
You know, every month many people are coming from different countries as immigrants, and they don't have that much money to spend on the house, and even the rents of the houses and the you can tell like they are really high. So your council or they are doing something for them?
Well, again, we need to expand secondary suites, legal fourplexes, allow legal triplexes for that very reason. The trend in Burnaby and frankly in other municipalities is to crowd all density in high-rise condo towers, and that's occurring in Burnaby. But there's two issues there. First of all, the new condos are incredibly expensive, yeah, often $1 million plus, and secondly, they're unsuitable for children. The notion of allowing more secondary suites, laneway housing, fourplexes, triplexes, allows two things. First of all, it helps homeowners pay for their mortgages, their taxes, and their living costs. But also, it's a prime source of less expensive housing for students, for seniors, for new immigrants, and for working singles and single-parent families. So, and it allows those people to live in neighborhoods close to schools and amenities, and not be simply stuck in high-density towers that they can't afford anyway. So that's a very important issue.
And there is a big issue coming up, homelessness. So there are very homeless persons on the streets, and there is one a survey that tells us 681 young person, they are on the streets, they don't have houses, and you guys are doing something for them?
Well, I've long advocated that Burnaby should have a permanent shelter for the homeless. The last survey of the group that goes out and surveys the homeless that you referred to, they identified that there was a population of approximately 65 homeless in Burnaby on any given night. Now that's an undercount because they can't go into every ravine, every park, every parking garage. And so Burnaby has, the council has refused to do anything about this until now. The effects of homelessness are, people say, well, what can we do about that? Homeless people tend to use emergency medical services more. They don't live as long. Youth are particularly vulnerable by exploitation. And so it's a problem in a wealthy part of the world, in a wealthy region of the province. We need to make these efforts to get rid of homelessness. I know Surrey, for example, and Vancouver have accepted modular housing, which gets people out of camps and into a place with a roof over the home, proper toilet facilities. But people don't realize that the cost of homelessness in medical services, when they run into problems with the law, the mental health issues, the risk to themselves, the risk to others, it's enormous, right? The medical costs, and it's actually less expensive to have them housed, whether in shelters or modular housing or ultimately in permanent housing for people with difficulties. It's a problem that when I was young, didn't happen in North America, but it has happened over the last 20 years, and we're wealthy enough as a society that we should really tackle it.
That's a big issue because they are young people. They are not senior, or they are not jobless. They are youth, and you know that's a real. They are future of the country, right? And then they are homeless. Then how can they run the country, right? And then you have any a certain solution for the problem? Like, you have any solution to tell them that they should do this, and then any shelter or something for them?
Well, the problem is complex. Yes, there needs to be temporary shelter because young people shouldn't be living out in the rain and the cold in the winter, and in the camps they're liable to exploitation. The notion of a emergency housing and then more permanent housing, such as the modular housing that Surrey, for example, has accepted, Burnaby hasn't considered, allows them to connect with service providers, whether there's mental health issues, whether there's substance abuse, whether there's health issues. the province has a limited number of beds, for example. Many people are homeless, have what's called dual diagnosis. They have mental health problems and substance abuse. Well, the province provides 100 beds in Burnaby for dual diagnosis people, and they're constructing a new facility which will be 106 beds at the old Riverview site. But frankly, that number in the Lower Mainland should be closer to 1,000 or more, right? Because people who live on the streets and are schizophrenic, bipolar, and are using drugs, they're not looking after themselves, right? And again, they're at risk to themselves and others. And secondly, the cost of health problems, problems like hepatitis, tuberculosis, other serious health problems, that requires emergency services and health services, which is incredibly expensive. So it's bad for the people involved, and it's bad in general. And it's important and it's an important issue in this election campaign, not only in Burnaby but throughout the region.
So we are talking about throughout the region. So there is a issue about the drugs and the gangs. Of course, a little bit less in the Burnaby, but like in other regions, there are drugs and gun violence in the region. So what are the plans to control it?
Well, the reason Burnaby doesn't have a great problem compared to other places is the police forces. We have the RCMP is relatively adequate, and in many communities the policing is adequate to deal with the enforcement. I mean, there are obviously laws against illegal drug trafficking and the possession of illegal weapons, much of which comes from the United States. They're brought into Canada. But from my perspective, the reports show over decades, for example, Surrey has spent far less on policing compared with Burnaby, Richmond, Coquitlam, and Vancouver. So the per capita cost per 100,000 people, Surrey has far fewer police officers compared to the region. And I think the result of it has been this explosion of opportunity and the difficulty in enforcing these types of issues in Surrey. It's not just Surrey, I must say. It's Langley, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack. As I say, much of the activity has been driven out of Vancouver and the inner municipalities. It's been driven out to the suburbs, and also I think the cost of housing, the ability to maybe set up in more remote locations. But certainly the chickens have come home to roost in terms of underfunding the RCMP. That's one aspect of that. Interdiction of weapons, the public, particularly in Surrey, should be concerned about that, but regrettably, not only does cocaine, for example, flow north through Central America, Mexico, through the States to Canada, but there's weapons that you cannot legally own in Canada, are being bought and sold in the United States and smuggled into Canada. And when you have these large seizures of weapons, many of them you cannot even legally buy or own in Canada, and that means more interdiction at the border, plus more enforcement, more resources for the anti-gang task force, because it's a great risk to just the community in general, as we've seen.
So Lee, we have to take a break for a little while, then we will come back. So ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਵੇਲਾ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਣੇ ਰਹੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਲਦ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ। So welcome back after a short break. We are talking with Lee Rankin, and he is giving good questions of our answers of our questions. So Mr. Lee, we were talking about the guns and violence, and now you are into the immigration, right? So you talked about the immigrants, and more than 50% are in Burnaby. They are from immigrants, right? So is there any special services for them?
Well, the city needs to do more. As you mentioned, in the last census, it showed that more than 50% of Burnaby's population, which is now about almost 250,000 people, are immigrants.
Yes.
And the other interesting issue is in the 2016 census, it showed that more than 60% of Burnaby residents are members of visible minorities, including 8% are South Asian and 33% are Chinese. In my view, the city workforce, for example, doesn't reflect the changing demographic population in Burnaby. So I think the city has to do more to encourage the hiring of visible minorities so that the workforce that actually works for the city looks more like the population in general. Also because of the wide variety of languages that are spoken in Burnaby due to the ethnic mix, like I say, more than 60% now are visible minorities, more than 50% are immigrants, is to make sure services, whether somebody's going to get a building permit or apply for zoning, or people that show up at our arts and cultural facilities or recreational centers, and in particular senior centers, that there's outreach and a welcoming approach, because the tendency with particularly recent immigrants is to feel isolated, and sometimes they're stuck because of language difficulties or acclimatizing to our culture. They feel isolated. So I believe that Burnaby can do a better job of outreach to particularly the new immigrant community, and be very inclusive in terms of the services we provide to the community, because it is a changing community. It's the fourth largest immigrant population of lower mainland communities, and I suspect Richmond and Surrey are up there on the list as well.
Yes, as well. Now there is an issue of taxes. Taxes are really high. So is the government doing something for reducing the taxes for the people?
Well, Burnaby should be able to not impose significant increases because it has collected over the decades. It has its own capital reserve funds in excess of $1 billion. Secondly, the city receives more than $10 million a year from a casino that's operating in the city. Now, the idea when that casino was put in Burnaby is that the money should be used for downstream services, social services, and policing, but instead Burnaby took the decision to take all that money and put it again into a capital, into reserves. Don't think that's the right way to go personally, that it could be used to offset some of the annual tax increases, again because taxes are a significant burden on homeowners, and taxes, local taxes do affect the ability to supply affordable housing.
And now there is an issue of a pipeline, Trans Mountain Pipeline, and some people are in, they want the pipeline and some people don't. And what do you think? Like, it the beneficial for us, for the Vancouver, or not?
Well, as far as Burnaby is concerned, we have worked over the decades to what I call de-industrialize the Burrard Inlet, the shoreline along Burrard Inlet, and also the Fraser River. And that's one thing, if you go to the Burnaby of the Fraser River foreshore, you'll see parkland, the foreshore park, and on the Burrard Inlet side you'll see the Barnett Marine Park. And our goal was to deindustrialize the entire shoreline. It's no different than as Vancouver's grown up. When I was a boy, False Creek was all sawmills and factories and cement plants, and now it's transformed into an urban environment, and that's what we were trying to do. So there's a unanimous view in Burnaby that increasing the facility of the terminal on the foreshore and building a larger tank farm on Burnaby Mountain is really a setback. That there are other opportunities, such as a pipeline through to Prince Rupert, that could have been considered. But the other thing I did as a councillor, we have Burnaby Mountain Park, and we negotiated with the province and the Simon Fraser University to have the university turn back 800 acres on Burnaby Mountain to add to Burnaby Mountain Park. So now it's the second largest urban park in the Lower Mainland. That's up there with Stanley Park and Pacific Spirit. And it's disheartening for many people, and now we have an urban community at SFU called University. The idea that the tank farm, the Transmont Tank Farm, is going to be added to. Again, the idea of re-industrializing Burnaby Mountain and the foreshore is, we think, regrettable. And particularly, it just came out today, and that people should look at that. Scientists that deal with climate change are telling us that we have to cap greenhouse emissions, and if we don't cap them by 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030, there is going to be a disaster that affects food crops worldwide, more fires, more devastating effects. So that's an issue that's going to affect our children, our grandchildren. The holiday of excessive greenhouse gas emissions is over, and people have to be concerned. Again, politicians say they care about their children and grandchildren. Well, if they don't get a grip of this issue, it's going to be a more problematic future for them worldwide as these effects are getting stronger. We've seen the BC forest fires the last 2 summers, and the effect on kids and seniors with asthma, and can't even play outdoors for a couple of weeks.
Yes, and hope now it's good. And then if we are talking about LRT, Surrey is having LRT, so people like SkyTrain better. So what do you think? LRT is good idea for the traffic and for Surrey or not?
Well, I'll just make this a general comment. The SkyTrain and elevated rapid transit, we've had these debates. I used to be a director of Metro Vancouver when we took over TransLink. And the advantage of course, a SkyTrain and elevated system is that it doesn't interact with the surface street system, so it's very fast, and you don't have to block streets as the cars pass. However, you need extremely high densities to make it work, and in certain parts of Vancouver and certainly in Burnaby, the idea is to encourage high density development, and there's been billions of dollars of development and economic growth because of the elevated system. It's convenient, and it's a great economic generator, but it's extremely expensive. I think the idea with the region was the line through Surrey, that initially, and looking out 20-30 years, is that the densities might not be there that support an elevated system. I understand it's a hot political issue in Surrey. However, the cost of building SkyTrain is incredibly expensive compared to a LRT system. That's issue one. Issue two is the region has reached an agreement. It's a signed agreement where the federal government and the provincial government are funding significant portions of the plan, which includes the extension to Arbutus and Vancouver and the Surrey LRT line. And that's the commitment that the governments have made and their regional mayors have bought into. So I think the honest debate has to happen is that those are committed funds and that's a committed plan, and I think that the politicians and the media has to say, is it realistic for you at this late in the game to do that, to change tracks? And that's the question that has to be asked, because it's easy to say, vote for me and I'll scrap LRT. It's not going to happen.
Mr. Lee, I know you worked with the city and with the council for 22 years, right?
22 years,
I know we have less time, but I want to schedule you again for discuss the whole aspect, like we discussed the North with the clause and everything. But right now, if we are talking about the elections, municipal elections, what are the other issues Burnaby is facing according to you?
Well, the other important issues is in Burnaby, the politics have been dominated by one party. Like Surrey has had Surrey First. In Burnaby, there has been one party that has had a monopoly on power for a long time. And in general, in local elections, same as provincial, federal, or worldwide, democracy thrives when you have a competition of ideas and a public debate of ideas, and that's not occurring in Burnaby. It's difficult for the media to do its job too, because they don't hear different points of view, and many decisions are not decided in an open and transparent matter. Like one issue, for example, where in Vancouver and Richmond over the past 16 years, they've increased their supply of rental housing, and we talk about affordable housing, they've actually significantly increased rental housing. Burnaby over the last 16 years has lost more than 1,000 units of purpose-built rental housing, particularly in Metrotown, where older areas, when I was on council, older areas in Metrotown, south of Central Boulevard and east of Nelson, we said, and I said, we're not going to destroy these older buildings because they provide inexpensive purpose-built rental housing. And in the last decade or so, the council upzoned these areas, so there's just been a feeding frenzy, and many of these buildings have been knocked down and displaced people that can't afford more expensive housing, and we've lost more than 1,000 units. And I think council was dead wrong in doing that without having a proper policy in place. They shouldn't have started upzoning those areas without a plan to house people that can't afford $2,000 a month in rent, but maybe can afford $800 or $1,000 or $1,200 in rent, which still isn't cheap.
Yeah. So I think that's it for today, because we have like only half an hour and we have many things to discuss. But I think I have to schedule you again to discuss other things too. But thank you so much for coming, and best of luck and for your elections.
Well, shukriya and sat sri akal, and
Thank
I
you
would
so
be
much.
love to come back.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much. So ਇਹ ਸਨ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ Lee Rankin, so ਜੋ ਬਰਨਬੀ ਤੋਂ council ਲਈ ਖੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ. So elect him for 9th time, and then we will see who will be the mayor for Surrey, Burnaby, for Vancouver, and ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਐਡਵਾਂਸ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਉਹ 10, 11 ਤੇ 13 ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਦੇ ਨੇੜਲੇ ਰੈਕ ਸੈਂਟਰ 'ਚ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਤੇ 20 ਅਕਤੂਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਦਾ ਵੋਟ ਦਾ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕਰੋ ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਆਪਦੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਵਧੀਆ ਉਮੀਦਵਾਰ ਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਚੋਣ ਕਰੋ. ਅਗਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਫਿਰ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਵਾਂਗੇ ਖਾਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ. ਤਦ ਤੱਕ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਅਰਸ਼ਦੀਪ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਦਿਓ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ. ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ.